A terrible day gets worse. Rebecca Walsh gripped her steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The Chicago traffic had been a nightmare, her feet ached from standing for 9 hours at the coffee shop, and now she circled the packed shopping mall parking lot for the third time. All she wanted was to grab groceries and collapse on her couch. Was that too much to ask? Her beat-up Honda Civic sputtered as she crept through the rows of gleaming SUVs and sedans. November darkness had fallen early, and the parking lot lights cast harsh shadows across the pavement. Finally, she spotted brake lights glowing red 2 rows over. Someone was leaving. Becca hit her turn signal and waited, engine idling. The silver Toyota backed out slowly, and she eased forward, ready to claim her prize. Just as the space cleared, headlights appeared from the opposite direction. A sleek black sedan rolled toward the same spot, fast and determined. "Oh no you don't," Becca muttered, accelerating into the space before the other driver could react. She killed the engine and grabbed her purse, feeling a small surge of victory. That space was hers. She'd waited, she'd earned it, and she wasn't about to let some entitled driver steal it from her. As she opened her door, she heard another car door slam nearby. "Excuse me." The voice was male, slightly breathless. "I'm sorry, but I was heading for that spot." Becca turned to see a tall man in his mid-30s approaching. He wore dark jeans and a navy pullover, his brown hair slightly disheveled. Even in the harsh parking lot lights, she could see the stress etched across his features. His eyes held an urgency that made her uncomfortable. "I had my signal on," she said coolly, shouldering her purse. "I was here first." "I understand, but please." He stepped closer, not threatening, just desperate. "I know this sounds strange, but I really need to get inside quickly. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Becca laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Everyone's in a hurry. Join the club." She gestured at the crowded parking lot. "I've been circling for 15 minutes. Find another spot." "There aren't any other spots, I've been looking for 20 minutes. His voice remained steady, controlled, but she heard the tension underneath. "I just need 5 minutes inside, then you can have the spot back if you want. Please." Something about his composed desperation irritated her more than if he'd been angry. Who did this guy think he was? Becca had been on her feet since 5 that morning, dealing with demanding customers, a broken espresso machine, and a boss who refused to hire adequate staff. She'd skipped lunch, her bank account was overdrawn, and her landlord was threatening to raise her rent again. This parking spot was the first thing that had gone right all day. "Look, I don't know what your emergency is, but I got here first." She locked her car with a beep. "There's more parking in the back lot. It's a longer walk, but you'll survive." The man's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he might argue further, but instead, he took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "All right. I'm sorry to have bothered you." His courtesy somehow made her feel worse, but Becca pushed the guilt aside. She didn't owe this stranger anything. "Good luck finding a spot," she said, already walking toward the mall entrance. She glanced back once and saw him standing beside his sedan, one hand pressed against the roof, his head bowed. He looked defeated in a way that went beyond losing a parking space. Then he straightened, got back in his car, and drove off toward the overflow lot in the distance. Shopping through the fog. The automatic doors whooshed open, and Becca entered the familiar chaos of the mall on a Friday evening. Tinny pop music played overhead, mixing with the chatter of shoppers and the squeal of children at the indoor play area. She grabbed a shopping cart and headed for the grocery section, trying to shake off the encounter. Why did she feel guilty? The guy had been pushy, assuming his needs were more important than hers. She'd done nothing wrong. First come, first served. That was how parking lots worked. Still, his face lingered in her mind as she moved through the aisles. That exhausted urgency. The careful politeness even when she'd been rude. Most people would have cursed at her or made a scene. He just accepted her refusal and walked away. Becca tossed pasta, sauce, and frozen vegetables into her cart with more force than necessary. She was overthinking this. The stranger was fine. He'd found another spot and was probably already inside the mall, having completely forgotten about their interaction. Meanwhile, she was replaying it like some kind of drama. Her phone buzzed. A text from her roommate Tasha, working late again. Don't wait up. Perfect. Another evening alone in their cramped apartment. Becca added ice cream to her cart, the premium kind she usually couldn't afford. After the day she'd had, she deserved it. At the checkout, she made small talk with the cashier, a teenager with blue streaks in her hair who looked as exhausted as Becca felt. Rough shift? Becca asked. The worst, the girl sighed, scanning items. Some lady yelled at me because we're out of organic kale. Like I control what's in stock. People are the worst, Becca agreed, handing over her debit card and praying it wouldn't be declined. The transaction went through. Small miracle. She gathered her bags and headed back to her car, her mind already on the Netflix series waiting at home. The parking lot seemed even more crowded now, cars prowling for spaces like sharks. As she loaded groceries into her trunk, Becca noticed the black sedan from earlier parked far away in the overflow lot, tucked under one of the few working streetlights. At least he'd found a spot. She slammed her trunk closed and climbed into the driver's seat. The drive home took 30 minutes through traffic that barely moved. Chicago on a Friday night was always gridlocked. Becca listened to a true crime podcast, trying to distract herself from her thoughts, but the stranger's face kept intruding. Those tired eyes. That careful restraint. Stop it, she told herself aloud. You did nothing wrong. By the time she reached her apartment building, a 3-story brick structure in a decent neighborhood, darkness had fully settled. She parked in her assigned spot out back, grabbed her groceries, and climbed the exterior stairs to the second floor. Her apartment was the third door on the right, number 2C. Inside, the apartment was cold and quiet. Tasha had left dishes in the sink again, but Becca was too tired to care. She put away the groceries, changed into sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, and microwaved a frozen dinner. While it heated, she scrolled through her phone, checking social media without really seeing it. An old college friend had gotten engaged. Another was posting photos from a tropical vacation. Everyone's life looked perfect online, all sunset beaches and champagne toasts. Meanwhile, Becca was eating Salisbury steak alone in an apartment she could barely afford, feeling guilty about a parking space. She ate on the couch, watching a cooking competition show where contestants made elaborate desserts she'd never attempt. The ice cream sat forgotten in the freezer. Her eyelids grew heavy, and she let them close, just for a moment. When Becca jolted awake, the TV was still on, showing some late-night infomercial. The apartment was dark except for the screen's blue glow. She checked her phone groggily. Almost midnight. She'd slept for 3 hours on the couch. Her head felt fuzzy, heavy in a way that wasn't quite normal. Maybe she was coming down with something. Great. Just what she needed. Becca dragged herself to her bedroom, not bothering to brush her teeth or wash her face. She collapsed onto her bed fully clothed and pulled the covers up. Sleep came quickly, pulling her under like a dark wave. She didn't notice the faint chemical smell in the air. Didn't hear the ancient furnace in the basement cycling on with a mechanical wheeze. Didn't see the carbon monoxide detector in the hallway, its battery long dead, unable to sound any alarm. As Becca drifted deeper into unconscious sleep, the invisible poison continued to fill her apartment, molecule by molecule, stealing the oxygen from her blood. Outside, the city hummed with its usual Friday night energy. Traffic flowed. People laughed in bars. Life continued, unaware that in apartment 2C, a young woman was slowly dying in her sleep. The same woman who hours earlier had refused a desperate stranger a parking space, never imagining that her path would cross his again. Never imagining that the next time they met, her life would hang in the balance, and only he would have the knowledge to save her. Julian Hart's running shoes hit the pavement in a steady rhythm as dawn broke over Chicago. The November air bit at his exposed skin, cold enough to see his breath, but he welcomed the discomfort. It helped clear his mind after another sleepless night. He'd been running these streets for 3 years now, ever since moving to this neighborhood. 5 miles every morning before his shift at County General Hospital. It was the only time his brain truly quieted, when the guilt and memories couldn't catch him. Last night had been particularly brutal. He'd lost a patient, a 29-year-old mother of 2 who'd come in with what seemed like the flu. By the time they realized it was sepsis, her organs were already shutting down. He'd fought for 2 hours to save her, but sometimes medicine wasn't enough. Sometimes people died, and there was nothing you could do except tell a devastated husband that his wife wasn't coming home. That's why he'd been rushing to the hospital last evening, trying to get there before her condition deteriorated. He'd gotten the emergency call while stuck in traffic, knowing every minute mattered. When he'd spotted that parking space at the mall, it was directly across from the hospital entrance, a shortcut through the building. Those 5 minutes could have made a difference. But the woman in the Honda had refused, and he'd lost precious time circling to the overflow lot. By the time he reached his patient, she was already crashing. Would those 5 minutes have saved her? Probably not. The sepsis was too advanced. But he'd never know for certain, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. Julian pushed himself harder, lungs burning. He wasn't angry at the woman. People had bad days. She'd looked exhausted, stressed, probably fighting her own battles. He understood that. What bothered him was his own helplessness, his inability to save people when it mattered most. The residential streets were quiet at this hour, most people still asleep. He passed the corner bodega just opening, the owner setting out newspaper stands. A delivery truck rumbled past. Somewhere a dog barked. Normal morning sounds in a waking city. Julian rounded onto Maple Street, heading toward the final mile of his route. This block had older apartment buildings, their brick facades showing decades of Chicago weather. Trees lined the sidewalk, their bare branches reaching toward the lightning sky. As he approached the middle of the block, something made him slow his pace. Years of emergency medicine had honed his instincts, taught him to notice details others missed. Something felt wrong. He stopped, breathing hard, scanning the buildings. There, 3 doors up. An apartment building, lights off in most windows. But wisps of something hung in the early morning air near the back stairwell. Not quite smoke, more like vapor. And there was a smell, faint but distinct. Exhaust fumes where there shouldn't be any. Julian's pulse quickened for reasons that had nothing to do with running. He moved closer to the building, following his nose. The smell grew stronger near the back. His medical training kicked in immediately. Carbon monoxide. Had to be. He ran to the front entrance and pressed every buzzer on the panel, holding them down. No response. People were probably still asleep. Julian pulled out his phone and dialed 911 while running around to the back of the building. This is Dr. Julian Hart. I'm at 847, Maple Street, and I believe there's a carbon monoxide leak. Multiple units potentially affected. Send fire department and paramedics immediately. The dispatcher's voice came through calm and professional. Units are on their way, doctor. Are there people inside? Yes, it's an occupied apartment building. I'm going to try to evacuate. He knew he shouldn't go in, knew the protocol was to wait for professionals with proper equipment, but he also knew carbon monoxide was an invisible killer. Every second mattered. The back door was locked, but Julian grabbed a decorative stone from someone's potted plant and smashed the small window beside the door handle. He reached through carefully, unlocked it from inside, and pulled it open. The smell hit him immediately, stronger inside. His eyes began to water. He pulled his shirt up over his nose and mouth, knowing it wouldn't do much good but needing to try. Fire, he shouted, using the word most likely to wake people. Everyone out. Get out of the building now. He ran up the back stairs, pounding on every door. Get out. Carbon monoxide. Everyone outside now. Doors began opening. A man in pajamas stumbled out, confused. What's happening? Don't ask questions, just get outside and help evacuate others. Julian commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to emergency situations. More doors opened. People emerged in various states of undress, some coughing, some looking irritated at being woken. Julian kept moving, kept pounding on doors, shouting warnings. On the second floor, he hit door after door. Most opened after his pounding, residents stumbling into the hallway. But one door, 2C, remained closed despite his repeated knocking. Open up. This is an emergency. He tried the handle. Locked. Julian stepped back and kicked hard near the lock. The old door frame splintered and gave way. Inside, the apartment was dark and reeked of gas. He could hear the furnace running in the walls, pouring poison into the space. Julian moved quickly through the small apartment, finding it empty except for the bedroom. A woman lay in bed, completely still. For a terrible moment, he thought he was too late. Then he saw the shallow rise of her chest. Still breathing, but barely conscious. Julian reached the bed and froze for half a second. Even in the dim light, he recognized her. The woman from the parking lot. The one who'd refused to move her car. He shook off the shock and went into full doctor mode. He scooped her up, surprised by how light she was, and carried her toward the door. She didn't respond, her head lolling against his shoulder. Bad sign. Severe carbon monoxide poisoning. Stay with me, he muttered, moving as quickly as he could while carrying her. Come on, stay with me. He made it down the stairs, passing firefighters rushing up in full gear. Second floor, 2C, furnace is the source, he called to them. Outside, dawn had fully broken. Residents huddled on the sidewalk in bathrobes and blankets someone had distributed. Paramedics were setting up, checking people for symptoms. Julian carried the woman to the nearest ambulance. Unresponsive, severe CO poisoning, he said to the paramedic. She needs high-flow oxygen immediately and transport to a hyperbaric chamber. We've got her, Doc, the paramedic said, recognizing Julian from the hospital. They transferred the woman to a gurney, fitted an oxygen mask over her face, and loaded her into the ambulance. Julian watched them work, his heart still racing. She looked so pale, so vulnerable lying there. Nothing like the defiant, exhausted woman who dismissed him 12 hours ago. You saved a lot of people today, Doctor. A firefighter approached, removing his helmet. That leak was bad. Another hour, we'd be looking at multiple fatalities. Julian nodded, unable to take his eyes off the ambulance as it pulled away, sirens wailing. Just happened to be running past. Lucky for them you did. Lucky. Julian didn't believe in luck anymore. He believed in timing, in choices, in the random chaos that determined who lived and who died. If he'd run a different route this morning, if he'd left 5 minutes later, if he hadn't noticed that faint smell, everyone in that building would be dead. Including the woman who'd cost him 5 minutes yesterday. The irony wasn't lost on him. Hospital reunion. 3 hours later, Julian stood outside the hyperbaric chamber at County General, reading the chart. Rebecca Walsh, age 28, coffee shop manager. Carboxyhemoglobin levels had been dangerously high when she arrived, but the treatment was working. She'd regained consciousness an hour ago, though she remained confused and weak. He should walk away. He'd done his job, saved her life, and now other doctors were handling her care. But something kept him standing there, staring at the small window in the chamber door. You know her. Dr. Patricia Owens approached, the attending physician on duty. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, someone Julian respected immensely. Not really. I'm the one who found her this morning. The hero of Maple Street. Patricia smiled. Nice work. Building inspector confirmed the furnace had a cracked heat exchanger. Been leaking for weeks, probably. Landlord's going to have some serious questions to answer. Julian nodded, still looking through the window. He could see Rebecca lying on the bed inside the chamber, oxygen mask covering most of her face. Her eyes were closed, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. Just resting. She's asking about you, Patricia said casually. Wants to know who pulled her out. What did you tell her? That a doctor happened to be jogging past and noticed the leak. Didn't give your name. Patricia studied him with that knowing look she had. Want me to keep it that way? Julian considered. What would be the point of talking to her? To hear her gratitude? To see if she recognized him? To tell her about the parking lot, about the patient he'd lost while searching for a spot? No, he said finally. I'll talk to her. Patricia nodded. She's got about 30 minutes left in the chamber. You can see her after. Julian went to the locker room, showered, and changed into his scrubs. His shift didn't start for another 2 hours, but he felt grimy from the rescue, his running clothes reeking of smoke and chemical fumes. When he returned, they were wheeling Rebecca out of the hyperbaric chamber. She looked better, color returning to her cheeks, though still weak. They moved her to a regular room, and Julian waited while nurses got her settled. Finally, Patricia waved him in. Don't tire her out. She's still recovering. Julian entered the room. Rebecca lay propped up on pillows, the oxygen mask replaced with a nasal cannula. Her eyes, more alert now, tracked him as he approached. Hi, he said, suddenly unsure what to say. I'm Dr. Hart. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck. Her voice was hoarse, rough from the oxygen deprivation. They said you saved my life. I was in the right place at the right time. She studied his face, and he saw the moment recognition flickered in her eyes. Wait. You're the guy from the parking lot. Last night. So she remembered. Yes. Rebecca's expression crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. Oh my God. I was so rude to you. You were trying to help someone, weren't you? That's why you needed the spot. It's okay. It's not okay. She wiped at her tears with shaking hands. You were rushing to save someone's life, and I wouldn't even give you 5 minutes. I was selfish and mean, and you still saved me. Why? Julian pulled up a chair and sat down, suddenly exhausted. Because that's what doctors do. We don't pick and choose who to help based on whether they were nice to us. But after how I treated you. You were having a bad day, he said quietly. We all have them. You don't deserve to die because you made one cranky decision in a parking lot. Confession and clarity. Rebecca couldn't stop crying, which was embarrassing because she barely cried normally. But lying in this hospital bed, oxygen flowing through tubes in her nose, facing the man she dismissed so callously just hours before, the emotions overwhelmed her defenses. I don't understand, she said, struggling to control her voice. How can you be so calm about this? I basically told you to drop dead last night. Julian leaned back in the chair, looking more tired than any person should look at 10 in the morning. You didn't tell me to drop dead. You told me to find another parking spot. There's a difference. Don't make excuses for me. She wiped her face with the scratchy hospital blanket. I saw you were desperate. I didn't care. I was so wrapped up in my own problems that I couldn't spare 5 minutes of basic human kindness. What problems? He asked gently. The question surprised her. No one ever asked about her problems. Rebecca hesitated, then figured she owed him honesty at minimum. Everything. My job is exhausting and doesn't pay enough. My landlord keeps raising rent. My bank account is always empty. My roommate is never home, so I'm lonely all the time. Yesterday, I worked a double shift on 3 hours of sleep, and all I wanted was to get groceries and go home. She laughed bitterly. Stupid, right? Your problems are real. Mine are just first-world whining. Pain isn't a competition, Julian said. Your struggles are valid, even if they're different from someone else's. His kindness made her cry harder. Why are you being so nice to me? Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Rebecca focus despite her tears. 3 years ago, I was married. Her name was Amanda. She was a teacher, loved her students, loved life. One winter night, she was driving home from a school event when her car slid on ice and went into a ditch. Rebecca's breath caught. She knew where this was going. The crash wasn't bad, Julian continued, staring at something beyond the hospital room walls. Minor injuries, nothing life-threatening. But it was late, the road was rural, and she was stuck. 3 cars passed her. She tried flagging them down, but they didn't stop. Maybe they didn't see her. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they were in a hurry. His jaw tightened. The temperature dropped to 15 below that night. By the time someone finally stopped to help, she had severe hypothermia. We got her to the hospital, but the damage was done. She died 2 days later. Oh God, Rebecca whispered. I'm so sorry. I was angry for a long time, Julian said. Angry at those drivers who didn't stop. Angry at the universe. Angry at myself for not being there. He finally looked at her, his dark eyes meeting hers. But anger didn't bring her back. And eventually, I realized something. Those drivers weren't evil. They were probably scared, or late, or dealing with their own crises. We're all just people trying to get through our days, making imperfect decisions. That's why you became an emergency doctor. He nodded. I couldn't save Amanda, but I could save others. It doesn't fix anything, doesn't balance the scales, but it gives me purpose. Rebecca processed this, understanding slowly dawning. Last night, when you needed that parking spot, you were rushing to help someone. A patient was crashing. I got a call while stuck in traffic. That parking spot would have gotten me inside faster, through the mall corridor directly to the hospital entrance. He shrugged. I made it eventually, but too late. She died anyway. The guilt crashed over Rebecca like a physical force. Because of me. Because I wouldn't move. No. Julian's voice turned sharp. Don't do that. She died because sepsis is brutal and fast. Those 5 minutes wouldn't have changed anything. I've replayed it 100 times in my head, and the math doesn't work. She was too far gone. But you don't know that for sure. No, he admitted. I don't. But I do know that blaming yourself for things beyond your control is a prison. I lived in that prison for 2 years after Amanda died. Don't build one for yourself. They sat in silence, the hospital sounds filtering through the closed door. Beeping monitors, rolling carts, distant voices. The machinery of healing all around them. Why did you recognize the carbon monoxide? Rebecca asked finally. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Julian almost smiled. Medical training and paranoia. Amanda's death made me hyper-aware of danger signs others miss. When I smelled those fumes this morning, every alarm in my head went off. He met her eyes. I'm glad I was there. Me too. Rebecca's voice broke. Julian, I almost died in my sleep. If you hadn't been running past, if you hadn't noticed, I'd be dead. My roommate wouldn't have found me until tonight. The whole building would have been dead. But you're not dead. None of them are. That's what matters. Because of you. She reached out and took his hand, surprising both of them. You saved my life after I treated you like garbage. That's not just kindness. That's grace I don't deserve. Julian squeezed her hand gently. Everyone deserves grace, Rebecca. Everyone. We're all struggling. We all fail each other sometimes. The point is to keep trying, keep helping, keep being human despite our failures. She held on to his hand, this stranger who'd become something else in the span of 12 hours. How do I pay this back? How do I make this right? You don't pay it back, he said. You pay it forward. Next time someone needs help, even if it's inconvenient, even if you're having a terrible day, you help them. That's how kindness works. It's not a transaction. It's a ripple. 6 months later. Rebecca stood in the parking lot of County General Hospital, holding a coffee carrier with 4 cups. Spring had arrived in Chicago, bringing warm breezes and blooming flowers to chase away the long winter. She wore her coffee shop uniform, her shift starting in an hour, but she'd made a detour this morning. Inside the emergency department, organized chaos reigned as always. She spotted Julian immediately, standing at the central desk, reviewing charts. He looked tired but focused, completely in his element. "Excuse me, Dr. Hart," she called out. He turned, and his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Rebecca. What are you doing here?" "Brought you coffee." She handed him one of the cups. "And your team, if they want it. Figured you could use the caffeine. You didn't have to do that." "I know." She smiled. "I wanted to." They'd stayed in touch after her release from the hospital, casual texts at first, then occasional coffee meetups that had evolved into an unlikely friendship. Julian had connected her with a therapist who helped her work through the trauma of nearly dying. Rebecca had introduced him to her book club, slowly pulling him back into social activities he'd abandoned after his wife's death. "How's the new apartment?" Julian asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Perfect. Great landlord, working smoke detectors, and a brand new furnace." She laughed. "I'm paranoid about carbon monoxide now. I have 3 detectors." "Good. Healthy paranoia saves lives." A commotion erupted near the ambulance bay. Paramedics rushed in with a gurney, shouting medical terms Rebecca didn't understand. Julian immediately shifted into doctor mode, handing her his coffee and jogging toward the chaos. She watched him work, directing his team with calm authority, moving with purpose and skill. Saving another life. It's what he did. Rebecca distributed the remaining coffees to grateful nurses and residents, then headed for the exit. As she pushed through the doors, her phone buzzed. A text from Julian, "Thank you for the coffee. Lunch next week?" She smiled and texted back, "Definitely. My treat this time." In the parking lot, Rebecca noticed an elderly woman struggling with grocery bags, trying to load them into her car while also managing a cane. 6 months ago, Rebecca might have walked past, too wrapped up in her own world to notice. Too tired, too stressed, too self-absorbed. Now she walked over. "Can I help you with those?" The woman looked up, surprised and relieved. "Oh, would you? My hip is acting up something terrible today." "Of course." Rebecca took the bags and loaded them into the trunk. "There you go. Do you need help getting home?" "No, dear, I'll be fine. Thank you so much." The woman patted Rebecca's hand. "You're very kind." Rebecca thought about Julian's words from that hospital room. You pay it forward. That's how kindness works. It's not a transaction. It's a ripple. "Just trying to help," she said. As she drove to work, Rebecca reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. She'd found a better apartment, picked up extra shifts that actually paid decent money. Reconnected with old friends, and most surprisingly, built a genuine friendship with the man she'd wronged in a parking lot. The guilt had faded, not because Julian absolved her, but because she'd learned to forgive herself while also becoming someone who would never make that mistake again. Someone who noticed when others needed help. Someone who chose kindness even when it was inconvenient. Her phone rang through the car speakers. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her accept the call. Hello. Hi, is this Rebecca Walsh? A woman's voice, professional and warm. Yes, speaking. This is Jennifer Chen from Lakeside Community Center. Your friend Julian Hart gave us your name. We're looking for volunteers for our meal service program, helping provide food to families in need. He said you might be interested. Rebecca smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. Julian was still looking out for her, still showing her ways to pay forward the grace she'd received. I'm very interested, she said. Tell me more. As Jennifer explained the program, Rebecca pulled into the coffee shop parking lot. Through the window, she could see her coworkers setting up for the morning rush, the familiar routine that had once felt like a trap but now felt like stability. Life wasn't perfect. She still struggled with money, still felt lonely sometimes, still had bad days where everything seemed hard. But she'd learned something crucial in that hospital room, something Julian had taught her through his example. Grace wasn't about deserving. It was about choosing to see the humanity in everyone, including yourself. It was about helping people even when they didn't help you, forgiving people even when they hurt you, and believing that kindness mattered even when the world felt cruel. Rebecca had been given a second chance, literally pulled from death by someone she'd wronged. She wouldn't waste it. Every day was an opportunity to be better, to help more, to create those ripples of kindness Julian talked about. She ended the call with Jennifer, promising to attend the volunteer orientation next week. As she gathered her things and headed into work, Rebecca caught her reflection in the car window. She looked different than she had 6 months ago. Healthier, happier, more at peace. Inside the coffee shop, the morning rush was already building. As Rebecca tied on her apron and moved behind the counter, she smiled at each customer, taking extra time with the ones who seemed stressed or rushed. Remembering that everyone was fighting battles she knew nothing about. A young man approached the counter, phone pressed to his ear, clearly stressed. I need 3 large coffees, fastest you can make them. I'm late for a really important meeting. The old Rebecca might have been short with him, might have made him wait while she served others first out of spite for his rudeness. The new Rebecca saw past the curtness to the desperation underneath. I've got you, she said warmly. 3 large coffees coming right up. What kind? His expression softened with relief. Thank you. Seriously, thank you. This meeting could change everything. Then let's make sure you get there on time. She worked quickly, efficiently, producing 3 perfect coffees in record time. Good luck with your meeting. He paid, grabbed the cups, and rushed out. But he paused at the door and looked back. You're a lifesaver. Thank you. Rebecca smiled. She thought about Julian, about Amanda, about all the people who'd helped her and the ones she'd failed to help. She thought about second chances and parking lots and the invisible threads that connected every human being. Just paying it forward, she called after him. And in that moment, standing in her coffee shop uniform, making minimum wage, still struggling to pay bills, Rebecca felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt useful. She felt connected. She felt like her life, ordinary as it was, mattered. Because Julian had taught her the most important lesson. You don't need to be a doctor to save lives. You don't need to be a hero to make a difference. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, the briefest moments of grace, ripple outward in ways you can never fully measure. All you have to do is notice when someone needs help. And then help them. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when you're tired. Even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. That's how the world becomes a little bit better. One parking spot, one coffee, one moment of grace at a time.